Hello, and welcome back to SpyHards podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And we are back with our extended coverage of Operation Finale from the year 2018. Cam, we have a very special guest joining us today. Who do we have?
Yes, we are talking to screenwriter Matthew Orton, who wrote this as a spec script, had it picked up by MGM, and I mean, in terms of a production to go through, like, this was a pretty dream first, a professional gig assignment.
We really enjoyed speaking with Robbie from Fighting on Film earlier in the week about the movie. So I think without further ado, Cam, let's roll that interview. And joining us now on the show, the screenwriter of this week's film, Operation Finale, it is Mr. Matthew Orton. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Hello, very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Lovely to meet you guys.
Absolute pleasure to have you with us here. It's always great to see and speak to someone that's been involved in films that we tackle on the show. Really help us sort of break it down and figure out why and how it was all put together. You've joined a long list of fantastic screenwriters that have joined the show, so we're happy to have you aboard.
I'm thrilled to join their illustrious ranks, and I hope I can keep up. I'll do my best.
Well, what we tend to do with these is start with the beginning a little bit. So
Sure.
Before Operation Finale,
Mm.
and I've read the story of how you got there a little bit, but we'll piece that together as you go. But let's take it back to the early days. What made you want to get into writing?
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I'm sure like you guys, I went to the cinema all the time. It was the best way to get out of the house. It was like kind of the only place you could really go on dates when you were like 13, 14. It was, I don't know, I was in love with the movies. I would go multiple times a day. I would go every week. And I think I was always into creative writing. I used to write these sort of short stories by longhand. I would read my little brother bedtime stories and make them up to try and get him to go to sleep when I was young. So storytelling, I guess, has always been something I've been drawn to. And then when I was about 15, I think I asked my mum how movies got written, who wrote them, and she bought me Sid Field's screenplay. And so I read that at age 15. I mean, fortunately, she's happy with my career choice now, but she's probably kicking herself when I came out of university and was like, I think I want to do this, for buying that book way back then. But I devoured it. I tried writing a script at school, and then I went to university and I studied history. And I learned about the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, and I thought, fuck me, this would be a great. Oh, am I allowed to swear on your show? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go nuts.
Cool.
You
okay,
can
great.
now.
Okay. Up until this point, it's been very PG, but I'll try not to swear too much. But I read about the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, and I thought, this would be an amazing movie or show or something. And I basically didn't get an internship the summer after my first year of uni, like all of my friends did. And so I was sort of dicking around in the summer, like, what am I going to do with my time? And suddenly thought, why don't I try writing this as a show? I'd love to see this as a show. And I think I got some advice from a screenwriter who was like very, very jaded and said, you shouldn't write anything but what you love. And so if you want to write something, just write something you're really passionate about. And I was like, yeah, I'm really passionate about this. So anyway, I wrote this ridiculously expensive hour-long pilot. This is like 2008, summer 2008. So I wrote this pilot. I'm in lots of plays at university. I direct some theatre, blah blah blah. But I leave university and I'm like, okay, I probably got to go and be a grown-up. And but did a small part in a TV show, and it paid me enough money so that I could go traveling for 6 months. I went traveling for 6 months, came back and thought, I've got to try the writing thing. And by complete coincidence, Game of Thrones had just started. And so suddenly, whereas before a pilot script about the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs was preposterous, especially as a first piece by a new writer, the market was kind of looking for it. People were genuinely interested in these sort of big budget, big scale shows. And so that pilot script, which was like just a thing I'd written in my summer, ended up being my key to getting my first agent, my first couple of commissions. And then there was kind of 3 years of real like grind and struggle, and all of the like working the worst jobs, and actually not the worst. I tutored for the sons and daughters of the world's billionaires for a while, which was pretty fun, and gave me a lot of material for stories. But there was also a lot of like shooting behind the scenes videos for crap bands, and I worked for Simon Cowell's company for a bit. Anyway, and then in 2015, I came across the idea for Operation Finale, and then it kind of went from there.
Well, not to get too far ahead there, but like, you've got your Aztec project, and now we're going to go into Finale. I'm just curious, as a writer, what about sort of these historical projects grabbed you? Because you said, you want to basically write what you love. And so where does the historical tie for you come?
Believe it or not, I really love history. I thought briefly about going to film school when I was 18, and my parents were like, no, you like need to get a proper degree. And so I guess my response to that was to go and study history for 3 years. But to me, history, and especially this like deep diving on specific periods, reminds you both of the repetitive nature of the human experience, but also how like many of the world's issues that we're tackling today have already been tackled so many times in so many different places across history. And so you begin to there's that great Mark Twain quote, isn't there? I don't know if it's actually his, but he's certainly credited with it, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so so for me, I like to try and write about today and things that are on my mind today, or things that I care very passionately about today. But often writing about particularly political stuff today can be difficult because our politics is kind of stranger than fiction. And so much in the way great sci-fi does this, I find that really great history can tap on kind of current zeitgeists or current political, moral, ethical questions in a kind of world that isn't our own. So it feels kind of analogous. Is that right? Is that the right word? It's a word, I think. Do you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Game of Thrones is a great show for just exploring like power and geopolitics, but it's set in a fantasy land, and sort of history, particularly distant history, has that fantastical quality to it, or that other that sort of sense of not being now that sci-fi fantasy also can do. So yeah, I think that's sort of what draws me into history. And also, I think that sorry, this is to really go off on a tangent. One of the things I really care about, and I'm just so fascinated by and passionate about, is how stories have shaped humanity forever, and how we are all governed by, whether we know it or not, these kind of narratives, and often overlapping narratives, that confuse, control, shape how we interact with the world. And so I find it really interesting going back into history and looking at like pivotal moments where the world has sort of developed one way of thinking about something, or has kind of something happened that maybe shifted our understanding of a moment. And those bits of our past, I think, are really interesting because they inform the world as we know it today. Does that make sense? That's probably very boring and philosophically sounding.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and actually reminds me a lot of some of the discussion points that came up when you were and other people were promoting Finale when it was being released. So yeah, and we can talk more about that later. But yeah, I think this all makes sense. Sure.
Yeah. I think as well, like listeners will know, but obviously you just met us. Cam and I met over a mutual love of Star Trek, and that is filled with analogy and metaphor, and you can do, and I can definitely see the similarities between that and historical stories and telling it that way. It makes complete sense.
There is an amazing Al Jazeera interview with I think he was a member of ISIS, who talked about seeing the Star Wars movies as a young boy and identifying so strongly with the Jedi movement, because he was like, because obviously the Empire is America,
Right.
and it's just such an amazing, like, yeah, that is story. Yeah, okay, cool. That's a thing that's just stuck with me. I saw that very early on in my career, and it's always stuck with me. Just that, like, how a terrorist could see himself as the freedom fighter, and there's obviously one man's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, sure, but that was such a great example and moment where that really came into focus. So again, you can take great moments in history, and actually just by looking at them from a different perspective, or thinking about what they may actually have been like, as opposed to our Hollywood imagining of what they're like, and really kind of start to pick at kind of our understanding of a moment, a person, a time, a place, and thus like where we are now, if that makes sense.
No, totally. And I think the last question I have before we drift into Operation Finale is, you talk about, you spent a few years and you had an agent, you were just getting your foot in the door at that point when it comes to writing. What were some people you were looking to, other screenwriters in Hollywood or in the UK, anything like that, as sort of inspiration on the way they write, and how do they influence you?
That's a really good question, actually. And I wish I had a more rigorous answer for you, because really what ends up happening when or for me at least, when I was coming up, I didn't go to film school, and I didn't really have access to lots of mentors until I hit about 2015. I got my first mentor, which I'll talk about in a sec. But the I don't know if you guys would have ever read a script by Stephen Knight. I don't
know
love
who Stephen Knight is.
Yeah, I don't love every one of his movies, though some of them are outstanding. And I've read a lot of first drafts of his, which are a bit more dubious. But I think that he is a beautiful scriptwriter. I think he has an amazing understanding of character, structure, pace, but he also makes these scripts sort of nice to read, beautiful to read. And he was the first screenwriter that I had come across. Drew Goddard's very good at this as well. Who really kind of brought a more novelistic quality to the screenplay format, which is, I'm sure you guys have read many, but they can be really dry and boring and kind of minimalist. And that's fine. I mean, sometimes you read minimalist screenplays, like the Alien screenplay famously is amazing. It's quite kind of simple. But sometimes it's just great to be like fully immersed in a world literarily. I don't think that's a word, I'm just making up. But like being immersed in the literature of what you're reading, and the kind of allowing your words to evoke feelings or ideas or thoughts inside of your reader, rather than just being like X and Y enter the room. Tyler Sheridan, though I think sometimes his portrayal of women sucks, is a really beautiful screenwriter as well. Really like vivid landscapes, depictions of kind of characters, their backstories. He kind of works that stuff into the body of the text, which I really respond to. Yeah.
Well, it makes total sense. You think about, like, you're writing this a lot of the times for the actor to pick up and then get an idea, and you're influencing and informing them about what their character is going to be, without necessarily saying, my character X used to be an accountant. He feels like it's about accountancy. You're saying things without saying them. I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, it's such a kind of cinema at its best is such an emotive, evocative medium that is sort of pounding multiple senses at once. To not at least try and get some of that out of the page, I think, is to kind of miss or undersell yourself as a writer and the possibility of the movie at large. Obviously, sometimes it backfires because you've put this really elaborate description of a lead actor in there, and then you find out they've gone to somebody who doesn't match that description. And you're like, what? Did no one think to change the? No, okay, cool. We're just gonna. All right. So yeah, that happens too.
I'm wondering what your description of Oscar Isaacs was in the script now.
Oh God, dashingly handsome and brilliant at acting, probably something like that.
There you go.
I have
nicely saved.
No, I'm afraid I have nothing but positive things to say about Oscar. He's a real gent. Yeah.
So when you write the spec script for Operation Finale, I guess
Yeah.
my main question is, why that story? Why did that feel like the one you had to tell?
Mm. So it's really interesting. I got introduced to the idea by a friend who ended up being like an associate producer on the project, who was suggesting sort of making it as a really contained thriller, a sort of, all takes place within the safe house and it's all about the interrogation of Eichmann. There's actually already a play that is that. Um, but I was like, oh, that's maybe a cool way of doing it. I don't know if that's something that I would want to do, but I'm interested in looking into the story, and I began digging into it. And again, to sort of go back to what we were talking about before, I'm always interested when a story speaks either to like a particular thing that's going on in the world at the moment, or something that I am dealing with psychologically, emotionally, some sort of thing that I want to unpack. And reading the story of not just Peter Malkin, but the operation at large and the impact that it had on Israel, this new country, I was really struck by this kind of notion of arrested development, or this idea of like not quite being able to let go of your past and thus being unable to embrace your future. And the kind of moment of catharsis that Israel, and in the movie we sort of posit Malkin, felt and achieved by this capture of Eichmann. And I had, I'd lost someone incredibly close to me at a young age, and I'd been really sort of, I had this on my back all of the time. It was sort of the thing that drove me to try and succeed. It still, to some extent, does, I think. And so I really connected to this guy who had lost someone that he'd loved very dearly, and had never quite been able to let go of that, and was sort of driven by that, but also slightly destroyed by it. And so I began to really connect to the character, and I also began to connect to this notion of sort of the formation of Israel and the kind of moment in this country's history, which, let's be honest, has not been a completely bloodless and straightforward history. But it was a moment in its history, and I do genuinely believe this, where they really did the right thing, and they really aimed to set out their stall as a country of saying we don't do this like they did. We want this to be a trial. We want this man to stand and answer for the crimes that he committed. And there was something that was kind of really noble and impressive about that, and kind of, and that in the context of the what was going on in Israel at the time, which was this kind of determination to not talk about the Holocaust, to not sort of what's the word after, to kind of escape from this idea of Jewish people getting onto trains and being led to their death. They wanted to sort of show that it meant something different to be Jewish now. And that, up until the trial of Eichmann, had sort of resulted in a sense of denial. I mean, there's terrible stories about how we have it in the movie too, but there's awful stories about how Israelis would refer to people who survived the Holocaust as soaps. Obviously in reference to the stories of the Jewish people being, well, they're fat rendered in soap and whatnot. Awful stuff. And it wasn't out of malice, it was out of kind of a deep sadness and a deep regret. And I think that the capture of Eichmann allowed the country a moment of kind of catharsis and a moment to sort of face the past. You hear these heartbreaking but amazing stories about just like the tears and the kind of release and the moment these people were able to kind of reconcile this awful thing that happened to them and this place that they're now in, or that they were now in as a country. Anyway, so there was a lot of that kind of stuff that I just found really inspiring and really kind of I knew what I wanted to say and kind of how I wanted to say it, and I knew that it was big. And I hadn't written a big historical thing for a little while, and I just kind of, so I went on my way. I quit all of my crap jobs. I think I'd maybe just got my first pilot commission. And I got paid like 14 grand, I think. And I was like, all right, I'm going to live off this for 6 to 8 months and write this thing. And it sounds very hackneyed and cliched to say, but I was genuinely down to my last, I think, like, I don't know, 500 or 600 pounds. Like, I was real close when I got the call about MGM wanting to buy Operation Finale, which was cool.
Well, that's actually a point I was going to jump into in a second, was MGM. But I wanted to just track back a little bit. Now, you mentioned there was someone who sort of helped you out earlier on. And
Yeah.
I see the name Matt Charman pop up in
Matt
online
Charman
article.
Matt Charman. Yep.
Yeah, he's been on the show before. We're big fans of Matt. For Bridge of Spies, when we tackled that a while ago. Yeah, great film.
I clearly didn't go through your back catalogue with enough of a fine tooth comb. Matt is the best of men. He is my mentor, friend, idol. I honestly couldn't say more nice things about the man. I love him. He became my mentor in 2015. I basically wrote this script. While I was writing the script, I'd written a different thing, a political thriller, that got me on. I'm going to make sure I get this right. Got me onto a mentoring scheme called Guiding Lights, which was a lottery-funded thing, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, but was an amazing thing for the British film industry. And the whole point of it was that they would find you a mentor. You could pick anyone that you wanted to be your mentor. And I went and spoke to a bunch of people in the industry who I'd met and sort of asked them who they thought would make a good mentor for me. And I think I asked 5 people, and 4 of them were like, you know what, you and Matt Charman, you'd get on real well. And so when it came to picking my mentor, Matt Charman was my number one choice. And I remember the people running the program were like, what? He's a playwright who's like co-written a bit of like a movie, and they're like, come on, I mean, we can get literally anyone you want. And I just had happened to know that Bridge of Spies was on the way. And my whole thing was, I want to know what it's like being someone in the marketplace now, not someone who came up 20 years ago and has enjoyed success for 20 years. And yeah, anyway, so they asked, Matt agreed to meet me. We had a wonderful first meeting in BAFTA. He was like, let's do this, let's go. And then when the finale script was originally just called Finale, the operation was not my idea. But when he read it, he was like, yeah, you should meet my manager. We should like take this out in the States. And that was kind of, yeah, it was cool.
Because I noticed a sort of symmetry when I saw Matt attached as an exec producer on the film, because Bridge of Spies was kind of a script, and then that got passed around a little bit, and then Steven Spielberg got involved, and lo and behold, it's one of the best Steven Spielberg films I personally think.
Sure.
And so
yeah, agreed.
That's how it landed. And your film as well, we're getting to the point now, you've written it, and there's a space of time where if it goes on the blacklist, which is the list of spec scripts that need to be made. But MGM hasn't brought it at this point. So is that where Matt's taking you around Hollywood? Is that period in time?
No, MGM had bought it at that point. We just hadn't announced it. It's a weird one. Like they bought it on November the 13th, 2015, which is my and Matt's manager's birthday. The wonderful Jeff Silver, who has a fantastic story, because I met him on the Monday. The Friday was his birthday, and he called me on his birthday to be like, you're not going to believe this, but MGM want to buy it, which was cool. And so it all happened incredibly quickly. It was a very, very fast thing. And actually, the sort of slightly longer and more boring story is it kind of gone around the British marketplace, and we had a couple of people make offers on it here. But one of the guy called Ben Irving who's just left the BBC, but he read it, knew that his company wasn't going to make it, but thought that Jeff, my manager, would really like it. So he sent it to Jeff at about the same time that Matt Charman sent it to his manager. And so that all kind of, he was like, oh, I've got to, anyway, did the whole spiel, agreed to work together on the Monday, and then on the Friday, he had sold it. And then I can't remember how many, we announced it after that, at some point. Because these things, everyone gets very excited about the kind of headline, we're going to buy it for this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to make you this. And then actually the paperwork takes fucking ages, and so it's not as exciting as you sort of think it's going to be. But it's super cool. It was super cool, and it was very strange actually. I remember it happened on the night of the Paris terrorist attacks, and my housemate at the time was Parisian, and so I sort of got this call at 11 o'clock at night, being like, "Hey, buddy, your life's going to change forever," and I was by myself and sort of sat in bed. Didn't know who to call. It was too late to call my parents or anything. And then my housemate came back. So I was like, oh, finally someone I can talk to about it. She was in floods of tears. And we stayed up all night watching the news coverage roll in. And at about 4 o'clock in the morning, she was like, you seemed really happy when I came in. Is everything okay? I was like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, it's quite good. But yeah, it's a very strange evening. Yeah.
Well, it seemed like from doing the research on sort of the development of this movie, in comparison, because every week we do this where we're tackling in a movie, and sometimes the journeys to the screen are tortured at best. And this seemed like a case where it's like a lot of the pieces fell into place pretty quick. And I would like to know about, when Chris Weitz entered the picture.
Yeah. So Chris actually came on board quite early. It was very funny I am probably allowed to tell this story. At the premiere, John Glickman, the then president of MGM, sort of got up on stage and gave this very sweet speech. This is the same guy who, when I first went to America, sat across from me. He's like head of, I think he was second in command at MGM. First time I've ever been to LA. They've obviously bought this script of mine, flown me over. It's all loads. We're in the meeting room for the first time talking about which directors we might want to speak to. John is just there sitting in his chair, leaning back, and just interrupts everybody, points at me and says, "How old are you?" And I was like, "How old do you think I am, John?" And he goes, "Nope, don't fuck with me. How old are you?" And I was like, "I'm 26." And he went, "Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself." And that was it. That was all he said all meeting. And I came out and I was like, did I do something? He's great. But John in the premiere was like, there was only one person I wanted to go to with this project, Chris Weitz. And Chris came on stage and was like, I know that's not true, but I appreciate it all the same. It was amazing. Chris, I mean, but to be fair, both to John and Chris, he was I think one of the first 3 or 4 people we spoke to. He's got obviously a deep personal connection to the project and subject material. I think was looking to do something a bit more serious in this space. And he's just a deeply thoughtful, intelligent guy. And so he came on quite early. And so I did a pass of the script for him. And then I can't remember how. I honestly can't remember exactly where it came from, but someone was like, "We think Oscar might be interested in this," so we gave the script to Oscar. He was like, "I'm interested in this, but I want to do a rewrite with you guys." So we then went to New York and sort of worked with him for a while on the script. And that was cool. Just going to New York to hang out with Oscar Isaac. I was like, oh, all right, this is a good experience. I've never been to New York before, and yeah. Turns out he knows the cool bits of New York. Who knew? And then that process took, I think, about a year on and off, and then we sort of finished the draft that we would go out a bit more widely with. Finding our Eichmann, we went through a couple more people than, Oscar was only person we spoke to for Peter Malkin. I like when we spoke to a couple, and then obviously landed Ben Kingsley, Sir Ben Kingsley. And then the rest of the cast came together super quickly. Obviously the wonderful Leo Raz, Founder, of Founder fame. Nick Kroll was amazing. Great addition, lovely guy. Yeah, it was cool. It like really, it was a dream in terms of process. It came together very fast. And you know, for a sort of movie with no sort of pre-established IP or kind of it existed, was made. I think it was 32 mil in the end was the budget, which is like a really unusual level of studio movie these days. And even then, amusingly enough, sorry, I'll stop talking in a second. The other person who had been trying to buy the script the same time MGM was Harvey Weinstein. And I, on that weekend, I was told, the MGM weekend, I was told to not answer my phone because it would be Harvey trying to call me. And sure enough, like I got a bunch of calls from an unknown number and didn't answer, and did in fact meet Harvey twice, I think, after this, because he, you know, was like, oh, I never wanted it anyway. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we were on set shooting Operation Finale when the Me Too news broke, and it was like mad because the whole team, we just had this collective shiver run through our spines because we're like, wow. And we were never, I mean, MGM were such brilliant partners, and we would never have gone with Harvey partly because he's sort of infamous for not paying people properly and all that sort of crap. But it was just, yeah, it was a real sort of someone walking over your gravestone kind of moment.
It's definitely a parallel universe sort of thing there. What could have been, but also a bit scary. I imagine what that set was like. We would not be having this chat, I think, in that parallel universe. Sadly, I'd have probably been fired from the movie and, you know, rewritten by, I don't know, someone who would do his bidding. But yes, anyway, yeah. Well, you mentioned, you actually kind of jumped into my next question a little bit as well, actually, there. You mentioned you did a sort of rewrite for Chris, and then when Oscar came on board, you did a rewrite there as well. You've been with the script, which is it's quite rare, actually, especially from the screenwriters we've spoken to. A lot of them just hand over the script, and off they go, and then the film gets made. And you seem to have stayed with it. I was watching an interview with you earlier today where you spoke about staying with it and making some changes during production.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, you cast your mind back a wee bit now, but are there any major changes that were made to the script along the way? Things that were taken away that you sort of missed, or things added that you think were brilliant? You know,
loads. I mean, you know, it was my first, obviously, experience having a movie made, right? So, and actually, like, I think before I say any of this, firstly, Chris and MGM actually were just so generous, both in terms of keeping me there and around. Like, Chris knew that I wanted to direct one day, and so was like, you should watch me because this will be a good lesson for you. And it was like being in film school for 8 weeks. He's remarkably generous with his time. And just, you know, in general, it was so cool to just be the writer on the project. Loads of stuff changed, and I watch back over the movie now, and there's some stuff that I haven't watched the movie in a couple of years actually, but there's some stuff that I really wish we'd been able to actually have in there. I think it's sort of, it hurts the movie it not being there. There's a couple of mistakes that I see as a writer where I'm like, fuck, come on, man, why didn't you think of that? Like, so there are lots of those sorts of things. In terms of actual big shifts, I think the first draft of the script, the one that sold to MGM, was much lighter on its feet. It was much more kind of playful, and I think that the humor, I hope at least, punches through in the sort of finished version, but there was a lot of that. There was a lot of humor in it, which I always think is a really important thing to include in any dramatic writing, really, but especially stuff dealing with heavy themes. If you allow your audience to laugh, then I think you give them permission to cry, and I think that's just helpful. And so I think some of that was pulled back on a bit in the interest of kind of the sort of significance of it, the drama of it, whatever you want to call it. And so it originally had a bit more of a heisty feel to it, a bit more of a kind of probably a bit more of an Argo-y feel to it, to be honest. I mean, that was always the big challenge with this project, is that it ends basically the same way as Argo. So making sure that didn't happen was a constant head scratcher. And then, of course, as the rubber hits the road on these things, questions start coming up about budgets and, like, we actually can't afford to have that actor, so we're going to get this actor. And maybe English isn't their first language, so we're going to need to change some of the blah blah blah. Or where there was a sequence here in a car, we're going to cut that, and that stuff kind of in itself, you don't really notice it changing the movie, but when you look back on the overall piece, you're like, oh, why is this bit not as kinetic as it was once in the script? And you realize it's because you slowly pulled out a lot of those moments from what it was before. It's also just amazing. Sorry, I'm rambling again, but it's amazing seeing how much movies change in the edit. Everyone always says it, but my God, when you get in there, you're like, huh, that is a different movie. And that's not. That makes it sound like that's the case with Operation Finale. It's a bit different, but it's not. I'm not like, wait, what? They caught him? But it's that was again, and Chris again very generous having me in the edit, like showing me how it worked, talking me through his process. That was super cool. Do you want me to think of specific changes? Because I probably can, but I'll need to rack my brain.
You can have it on the back burner and think about it. We're happy to know things if you know them. Yeah, if it pops to you,
I'll
let's
noodle
know.
it. Yeah. I think that. Well, I think in the first draft. Yeah, in fact, that's right. None of the Lothar Herman stuff and Sylvia and her dating Klaus, that all existed in the first half from the beginning, but none of the kind of kidnapping of the maid or the kidnapping and torture of the maid, and also the kidnapping of Lothar Herman, both of which are things that happened after the operation but did actually happen, including the carving of a swastika into her chest. Neither of those things happened in the original. I think that I made up a lot of more stuff that the Takawara did in terms of like hunting them down, and like I think I played a little more fast and loose with history. And I tell you, the one thing that I do remember that I am to this day sad that we cut. Previously, we met Eichmann during the Wannsee conference, and he had a this is sort of in the movie, but it wasn't what I had envisaged. He has a stain on his shirt, and he scratches at it. And then we realized that people are waiting for him to talk, and so he stands up and gives his speech at the Wannsee conference, and then licks his finger and wipes it, and it comes off. And we went from that to a sequence of basically Eichmann escaping. So he had this amazing escape across Europe and into Latin America, and there was a kind of stylized like him as a lumberjack, and he's kind of chopping, and his face is red, and he lies down in the snow, and the snow goes on his face and it melts, and like there was like a really fun like, how did Eichmann get from there to South America? That was an early like, that's gonna be expensive, let's so I just remembered that. A good one.
No, that's great. Thanks for that. One aspect of the movie that I think you like did really well was juggling the elements which is that like you're telling a thriller that a mainstream audience can enjoy. But I would, Scott and I have covered a number of, World War II, espionage thrillers.
Sure.
And there's a certain expectation an audience has. And I feel like when you bring the Holocaust into it, suddenly the audience's stomach drops. And that can be incredibly difficult to convey in a way where the audience walks out of the movie being like, that was really good, telling their friends they should go and see it. And that's something I think this movie really does a fantastic job at. And I would like to know from you, just balancing the elements of that, like heavy subject material with a spy plot people can get invested in, and of course, characters they can get invested in.
Well, part of that is obviously, and again, this is, in no small part thanks to that amazing book, Eichmann in My Hands by Peter Malkin, of just like the work that has been done post the kidnapping and execution of Eichmann to sort of humanize the guy. And that is not to kind of suggest he's anything other than like a heinous criminal that, deserved the worst fate. But by trying to place him in a human context as opposed to a kind of villainous Nazi context, it sort of opens the movie up into being something slightly different from a conventional Holocaust movie. And then also, again, the humor, just making sure that you don't stray too hard and fast into the kind of horrors of the Holocaust without giving people an opportunity to kind of what's the word for that? Unwind basically with humor. And I think one of the Schindler's List, obviously, like Ray Fiennes' character is completely despicable, but there are funny moments in it. And when you find yourself laughing in amongst the horror, I think it actually serves to like deepen the moments that are horrific, but stop them from becoming stifling and unbearable. I mean, an amazing movie that I love and am hugely inspired by is Son of Saul, but it's a hard watch. Like do you know what I mean? Because it's just unrelentingly bleak. And so I completely agree. I think a lot of movies that touch on the Holocaust struggle to find a tone that both feels respectful without being overly difficult or overly heavy, I suppose. So and actually, to be honest, having a lead in Oscar, he's so charming and so watchable and so he's a really smart actor, and so he knows sort of what audiences will and won't respond to. He knows the side of himself to show when. And I think he really got the idea of like bringing an audience in gently before you begin to unpack the heaviness of what a lot of the movies kind of orientated around. If that makes sense.
Definitely.
No, for sure. It's actually a question I was going to ask anyway, so it sort of leads beautifully from this. And it's a problem I had with the film, and not in the sense of pointing at anyone in particular, but I was watching Ben Kingsley portray this man who I know to be abhorrent. And he's giving him a character, he's giving him a life, he's giving him a personality and quirks and all these sorts of things. And I at times thought, like, this is too human. But then I watch an interview with Ben Kingsley about the film, and he says that's the point. We're meant to show that he is and what we are capable of. And that's a scary realization to make. So I suppose to bring it to a question, what was it like for you trying to navigate those waters and trying to make it sound, bridging the side being farcical and also very straight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's that scene where he has to take a shit, which is sort of, I mean, like, I suppose where I come down on it and came down on it and what I always come back to is this, the tragic but true realization that all of these heinous things are just done by people. Like we are all maybe capable is the wrong word, but like humankind is capable of the worst atrocities, but we're also at the same breath capable of like loving our families, loving our pets, doing good things for our community. And I guess in a world as polarized and polemic as ours currently is and seems to be becoming, I am drawn to material where it's like, hey, like this guy is the fucking worst, but like that, don't write him off as just a monster, because if we think of him as just a monster, if we think of Eichmann as like this kind of quirk, this anomaly in the human condition, we will miss the next one. Like, humans are capable of this shit. And I think it is important to understand that just because someone loves his kid, or just because someone, looks after his partner, doesn't mean they're not capable of also murdering or signing off on the murder of millions of people. And so I kind of saw it as a important way of exploring a more important way of exploring the character than just being like, look at Eichmann, he's a monster, they need to catch a monster. Because of course that is not what the real world is like, as much as we wish maybe sometimes that it was. There's a great interview that I think it's Adam McKay, actually. I think someone asked him how he would do the movie of Trump. And he was like, you would show a guy waking up in the morning, going and looking at his fat schlubby body in the mirror, hating himself, and just knowing that he was going to have to go out the day and face the world. And instead of doing that with humility, he puts on this armor of, odious confidence. And suddenly you're like, he's still the worst fucking person in the world, but I kind of get it, or like I get where he's coming from. And, that's what makes anti-heroes often so compelling. I'm not suggesting someone should do a movie of Eichmann from his POV as an anti-hero, but like I do think that the kind of finding the humanity in evil people reminds us, if it's done responsibly, that lots of seemingly nice people are not that far away from very awful things, and we must always be conscious and careful of that.
Well, it goes to show and credit to you, really. This is your first film in like major motion picture made, and you're dealing with these hard issues. You could easily write a script about a rom-com or something as your first film, but no, you're tackling these heavy hitting things, and I think you do it with finesse, and it's something I personally had trouble dealing with, but that's just me and my own hang-ups. It's not
sure.
writing.
Yeah. Sure. By the way, I got some very angry emails off the back of it. I got some very nice emails. Yeah. I got some people who weren't very happy with the way that the movie chose to. And actually, to be honest, some of the reviews, I should say I'm really proud of the movie. I see a lot of problems with it. Very proud of it, and I think that some of the reviews are fair. Some of them, I think, though, got quite hung up on that challenge of like how we've chosen to portray Eichmann, the sort of attempt to humanize him or dig into his philosophy, or what philosophy there was. And I'm sure there's more we could have done. But yeah, I thought that was, for me, it was one of the project's strengths. It was one of the reasons for doing it.
No, I mean, if you listen to the review earlier this week, Cam and our guests both speak highly of that. It's myself who has the issue. So
you're just slagging it off.
Yeah, I'm just taking a shot. I've got the screenwriter here.
Yeah,
why not? No, I wanted to unpack it with you, because that's why I wanted to hear your side of it.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I would like to know if you had any connection or contact with the Malkin family during the process of the script.
One of my deepest frustrations with the process was that very early on, after MGM had bought it. So obviously the story is in the public domain. There's a lot of information, articles, books, the rights to Peter Malkin's book were tied up, I believe, in quite a complicated, I think someone had them for a long time and didn't want to relinquish them. I can't remember the specifics of it. But I reached out to Peter Malkin's son. I think I reached out to him via LinkedIn. And then, or did he reach out to me? I can't remember. We basically had a brief bit of contact. And then I mentioned to the studio that I was talking to him, and whoever had the rights to his dad's book sent the studio a cease and desist letter, which is just, an attempt to spook them, I think. But the studio, like, you must not talk to him. You have to stop. And it really sucked because I was like, I'm writing about his dad. Like, this is preposterous. And they were like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But like, you can't right now. And they basically spent, I think, the whole development time of the film trying to figure it out, didn't figure it out. But then by the time it was done, they had sort of figured it out. And he came to the premiere and I got to meet him and it was wonderful.
Oh, that's
I
great.
think, yeah. And yeah, it was really cool. That was really nice. It's a shame though, because I would have loved for them to be on set and sort of seen our rendering of their dad. Of course, it's a fictionalized version of the man, but like that would have been cool. It's always I'm now actually, as a result of this, very careful when I'm adapting something that involves sort of still living people or the family of still living people, where possible, to kind of check before diving in or before actually fictionalizing these people that they'll be able to attend a premiere or at least like have conversations about it, because it just feels a bit icky as a writer. It just feels wrong to, take someone's story like that. So yeah, do my best, but it doesn't always work.
So do you think in a different scenario, like had you had more contact with him before writing it, it would have shaped the way you'd written the movie?
Maybe. I mean, there's so much material out there. I got such a comprehensive view. I mean, there's movies, all bad, but they still exist. There's tons and tons of literature. So I had a pretty clear idea of like how I wanted to structure the movie, how I wanted the character to kind of interact with the people around him. It may have, yeah. The thing is, like, people are more complicated than they're often portrayed in movies, and so there might have been a great opportunity to add a little bit of that complication. But it's quite a kind of busy movie anyway, and so I don't think I would have. It would only have added texture as opposed to, like, I think, revolutionized to the plotting or anything. It might have had an impact on the character arc as well. I took the sort of I did speak to the son of the anesthesiologist who was actually on the mission, who in Operation Finale is played by Melanie Laurent, who's a woman. And I sat down with this guy in Israel and sort of asked him loads of questions about his dad and whether or not, like, he could tell me anything interesting about what his dad did. And he didn't really have any stories. His dad didn't really talk to him about the whole operation. And sort of was quite fruitless. And at the end, I was like, I think actually I think I want to turn one of the characters on the mission into a woman. Like, what do you think about that possibly being like your dad's character? And he was like, whatever. I didn't really care. And I think at that time, because it was I was just a screenwriter writing this thing on spec. It was just a kind of like, I don't know, who the fuck's this guy? Like, whatever. So I don't think he really thought about it. And then I think when he saw the actual movie, he was really upset that we hadn't made his dad a character in it. And that, I was sad about that. I was sad about him being upset, but I was also like, I told you, and like, that is kind of how these things go sometimes. And so, it's a weird, like, when you're telling a story about people either still alive or their families, like, it's a really weird one to navigate. And we will just kind of try and do our best and, have the best of intentions. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't.
Well, you mentioned this earlier on in the conversation. I made a note to bring it back up when we're sort of talking about the film. Originally, it wasn't called Operation Finale.
Yeah,
Operation was added. Where did that come from, and were there any other names at any point? Because it seems that seemed like a little bit of contention with you there.
Oh yeah, little guy, yeah.
I'm the bad guy today, apparently.
Yeah, no, you're not the bad guy. No, in this particular instance, test audiences are the bad guy. So we actually went through so many names for the movie. When I sold it, it was just called Eichmann, which is not a compelling title, as the movie that was then subsequently released called Eichmann shows you. We called it Hunting Eichmann for a bit, although there's a book called Hunting Eichmann, which is a brilliant book that I think MGM were nervous about sort of copyright issues. I don't think it's normally a problem with titles, but just to be safe. We one of my favorites, though everyone shot me down, was The Driver is Red, which was the code name that the Israelis relayed to one another when they believed that Eichmann was Eichmann. Unfortunately, the code for Eichmann is Eichmann, not we think Eichmann is Eichmann, was The Driver is Black, which would have been a really weird title for the film. So, we ditched all of those. There were a couple of others as well, but we ended up on Finale, and I was like, yeah, you know what? Final Finale, it's got a kind of gravitas to it. It was the name of the operation. It's also to do with the final solution, blah, blah, blah. And I remember it was quite close to the release. We were still sort of arguing over the title. And we had this meeting, and it was just after a couple of screenings. And one of the execs was like, yeah, listen, all the test screenings we've done, Operation Finale tests better than Finale. And the reason, apparently, was because there was a concern that if we called it Finale, people wouldn't know how to say the word and they would call it Finale. And I don't know loads about movie making. I don't know loads about human psychology or whatever. But I was like, but surely they just call it Operation Finale. Like, no, is that? Anyway, it was one of those moments where like you realize the decision was made so long ago, and you're being told as a courtesy. And I think the person who broke the news to me was this wonderful exec from MGM who I love very dearly, Cassidy, and she really saw the funny side of it. But it's one of those things where you're like, someone's made this call, and I don't get it, but I know that I'm not going to have a say on it. So yeah, that was how that one went. It's fine. It's fine. You don't need the operation in front of it. It makes it sound like a movie that it's not. Anyway, whatever. Operation Argo. Would you anyway?
Yeah. It's funny though, because Scott and I covered a while back a movie called Operation Crossbow, which was a World War II espionage film, and the movie didn't perform great, and they blamed the fact it had the word operation because they thought it was a medical film.
Incredible.
And so they released it as Crossbow internationally. And so yeah, it seems like there's a lengthy use of the word operation in spy movie titles where they never quite know what to do with it.
And just to add a little extra source to it, I mean, you look back on License to Kill, 1989, they wanted to release it as license revoked, and apparently parts of the world wouldn't understand. Yeah. They wouldn't understand the word revoked. So,
oh god,
don't worry, you've had the same treatment as a Bond film. There you go.
I'll take it. There is some logic that happens in the world that around things like this, and I just don't. You have to. So I'm actually right in the middle of a conversation about a spy show that I'm working on, or sort of spy show that I'm working on, that we're now changing the title, I think. And just titles suck, man. It's so hard to find the right thing. But also when you become attached to something and then someone suggests a shit alternative, the immediacy of your reaction is it's terrible. So yeah, anyway, it's all good.
Well, we're talking about sort of the legacy of the film. It went out to people, did test screenings. Now the film's out there. You're at the premiere. You're watching it now in its final complete form. And looking at the film, what are you most proud about the film? Like a scene, perhaps, because this is your first screenplay to a film. It's a big thing.
Yeah. There's a line where Peter Malkin is fighting with, or is doing Krav Maga practice with Michael Aronoff, the amazing Michael Aronoff, brilliant actor. And Michael Aronoff says something like, "Why do you think they pick you? Why do you think it's always you?" And he says, "I don't know, anti-Semitism." And it got such a good laugh. And it was a line that had been in there from like the very first draft. And it was just it's such a small, silly moment, but it was just this like, I can do this. Like I filled with imposter syndrome every now and again, and like I still got lots to learn, I'm sure, but that was like one of those moments where I was like, oh yeah, actually, that's cool, that's real. There's also another moment where when Oscar Isaac or when Peter Malcolm is explaining to Eichmann about his sister, and he tells him what happened to her, and Eichmann apologizes and tries to say like, I don't know what happened to her, and Malcolm, I think, responds with like, I wasn't asking. And there's just something in that moment which is always stuck with me, of the like two people trying to find one another but misunderstanding, and that flash of tension. I don't know. Those are two moments that they're really, really small moments that stand out for me, but they were moments that I think I really hang to, because they're moments that I'm not like, oh, I wish we'd done like that, or I wish I'd done this. Yeah. So like there's loads of bigger things. Like it was just fucking amazing seeing all of these actors doing this movie and being at a premiere, and the being a screenwriter can have its sort of moments where you get really kicked in the nuts. But it's pretty cool when you stand on set and you're like, this came out of my head. Like I don't know. Those are the moments that I really hang on to, and they're the moments that make this job really special. In amongst the operation finale finale kind of shit. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything. I've just remembered something. Sorry, I will add this.
No, go on.
In the original draft of the script, there was loads of jokes. Rafi Eitan, played by Nick Kroll, is a famously short person, right? And he's a very short man. And there were loads of jokes in the script about his height in relation to Malkin, and Malkin kind of teasing him for, being not that tall, because Malkin himself was not that tall, but he was a bit taller than Rafi. In reality, Nick Kroll was taller than Oscar, and so those jokes didn't play. So we cut all of them, except history only remembers the tall people. And Oscar says, "What about Napoleon?" And he walks off, and the line gets a laugh, but it's like, what? And that is actually a callback to like 8 jokes that got cut. And I forever am like, why didn't we rewrite that last scene if you're going to keep it in, but cut all the others? It was very weird. But anyway.
It definitely does stand out, though, as a line, because Scott and I quoted that to close off the review. So, I mean, it worked, I guess, at least on some level.
Sure.
Of all the things.
Cheers,
of all of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Great.
Well, I suppose the last question I have about finale, and Cam, you could jump in as well if you have anything. It's just in retrospect now, as we said, this was your first screenplay made to a major motion picture. What did you take away from it? What did you learn from doing the process?
Oh my God, man, we're going to need another hour and a half for this. So much. I'll try and boil it down to like 2 or 3 of the biggest takeaways. As a writer, you spend a lot of your time crafting the words on the page. You try and wring meaning out of bits of dialogue. You try and describe the way in which an actor might do something. Obviously not too much. You don't want to impose on their craft, but you do try and get a sense of like what's going on. You really agonize over what each paragraph is doing, which each sentence is doing. When you see it then up on screen, you realize actually an actor as good as someone like Oscar Isaac can do all of that with a look. And what it teaches you, I think, or it's taught me at least, is that when you are writing for screen, write for screen. Don't try and kind of impress people with the beauty of your words, because that's not often how people speak. In fact, most people ramble. Most people are roundabout or kind of hide what they're really trying to say, and what they really mean, what they really feel is done with looks. And so that was an amazing lesson to take away from the process. I also just, for the first time, really got to understand and grapple with an actor's process. So again, Chris, because he's the best, because he's the best, and also because I think secretly didn't want to have to deal with this himself. Whenever actors had character questions, he was like, "Go speak to Matt." And so that was quite interesting, because people, and Nick Kroll was particularly keen on this and good at this, but he would be like, "So, what's like, where's my character from, and like, what, how did he get from here to here?" And it really, you realize how rigorously the best of these guys interrogate the material and sort of build those characters in their heads. And so that really reminded me that I need to always up my game in terms of the depth of character backstory, nothing you're seeing on screen, just like where these people are from, who they are, what they believe, why they believe it, and having that to hand both makes the process of writing easier and better, but also just saves your ass in conversations like that. It means you're not kind of freewheeling. I think those are the never get too attached to bits that you love. There is a scene, Simon Russell Beale is in the movie for one scene, I think. He plays David Ben-Gurion for one scene, and he had this monologue about speaking to a British politician, and this British politician, and asking what the Emperor Titus was famous for. And this British politician makes 3 guesses, and they're all wrong to the Jewish people. He's like fixing poverty, going to war, blah, 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 blah. And he says, this is how history remembers this man who destroyed our temple and scattered our people to the wind. And some of it was improvised by Simon Russell Beale, and a lot of it was there, but it was this amazing, stirring speech. And it was just, I wish I had it on tape somewhere. I'm sure I find it. Because it was just like, this is the movie. This is what the movie is about. This is how people remember people like that, because they were never held to account. And MGM were like, we need to try and get the movie under 2 hours. So, and that, I think, is that was a huge mistake, in my opinion. I think that speech really would have hit what the film was about in a really powerful way. But anyway, is what it is. So yes, never get attached to stuff. That would be my, or never get too attached to stuff. Know what you want to fight for. I'm now much better at picking my battles.
Right. And I just have one final question I wanted to ask, which is that, you had a very accomplished technical advisor and consultant on this movie, and Avner Abraham, who was obviously former Mossad. And I'm just curious, I don't normally ask this of writers, but when you have someone this specialized, does that have any impact on the work as well? Because they can contribute so many ideas as well and so much insight.
Loads. I mean, Avi, he was less of a script consultant, though he had ideas and he sort of threw a few little bits and pieces in there, and he kind of tweaked a little bit of the specifics in the dialogue. He, I think, drove the art department fucking crazy, because he was just like, this is what that would look like. That's not what that would look like. His technical know-how in terms of just sort of props, costume, locations, that kind of thing, second to none. Really amazing. And he was great fun to work with.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the SpyHards Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors, and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
Well, Scott, the Die Another Day commentary is live, and we are getting dirty again with Harry Callahan with the third installment of the Dirty Harry saga, The Enforcer. It's going to be marvelous.
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true SpyHard today and join the circus at patreon.com/SpyHards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx. Well, I think before we wrap up, I did have a couple of questions post-Operation Finale.
Yeah, sure.
One thing, and this is just me from doing my research today, and I haven't seen anything else about it since, but your name came up with The Night Manager Season 2.
I knew you were going to ask. I can't wait.
I mean,
Yes,
it's John le
let's talk about
Carre.
it.
I'm going to ask about it.
Yeah.
And the first season's terrific.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I mean, how did that come about, and what's going on?
Good question. So I will give an answer that will be less diplomatic than it should be. I'll maybe sprinkle a little bit of diplomacy in there. So very long story short, I got asked to be part of a room for The Night Manager Season 2 around the time I sold Operation Finale. That room never materialized. I then got asked after, if I remember rightly, we announced that I was going to do this movie, write a Battle of Britain movie for Ridley Scott, and that Oscar Isaac was attached to Operation Finale about the same time. And by complete coincidence, both bits of news broke at the same time, and that created a kind of, I guess, like bump for me. And that led to the conversation of actually you should run a room rather than be in a room, which was really cool. It was very flattering, very kind of them. And I sort of went and presented them an idea of what I would do for the second season of The Night Manager. And they were interested, and we started talking about it. It was a slightly kind of bumpy process, and I'm not sure if you've checked it out, but The Night Manager has, I think, 19 exec producers. It's something bonkers like that. So it is a film. It is a show that, when you actually scrape back the kind of layers of how it all came together, it's a lot more complicated than a lot of shows often are. Hugh Laurie, very, very involved in the creative, and an absolutely, Hugh Laurie makes the first season of The Night Manager, made the first season of The Night Manager what it is. He was rewriting scripts. He was like a complete towerhouse of performance. I mean, all three of the leads are amazing in that show. But obviously, the show is very successful. So all three of them were quite skeptical about the idea of coming back for a second season. So I wrote two drafts. I wrote a draft for the first episode and a draft for the second episode of another 6-episode run. Gave it to Hugh, Tom, and Olivia. They all got on board. They all loved it. It was off to the races, and so we put a room together. I worked with some absolutely amazing writers in that room. A guy called Charles Cumming, a woman called Nancy Kahn, and a woman called Francesca Gardner, who is, an unbelievably talented writer. And we wrote the second season. We outlined the whole thing. We had outlines. We had 2 episodes. We had structure in place. And I don't know if this is all that was going on, because I was kind of shielded from a lot of the politics. But the story that I heard was that le Carre himself read my 2 drafts of episode 1 and 2, came into the producers' offices and said, these are good. These are really good. They are more Matthew Orton than they are John le Carre. But yeah. And I got a phone call the next day being like, how do we make the scripts more John le Carre? And it was this kind of sort of moment where I think I and a lot of other people realized that actually, of the 19 executive producers on board, there was still a lot of disagreement about the direction that it was going in. and we had a very, very specific window that we needed to hit for filming. And I think Hugh got wind of the kind of, horses being a bit nervous in the stable, and was like, guys, I'm not going to commit to this if you're going to fuck around with the scripts at this stage. I'm out. And I don't think there was any point in making Night Manager season 2 if Hugh Laurie's not involved. So I was like, okay, I'm also going to bow out. Yeah, I mean, Olivia and Tom are both obviously stupendous actors and great talents to work with, but Hugh is that show, right? Like, imagining that show without Richard Roper is hard. So I ended up walking away, which was really sad. But and then I think, if I remember rightly, about 3 or 4 weeks later, John le Carre came into the office and had rewritten what he thought the Night Manager season 2 should be, I guess, as a sort of protest to my work. So it was a real shame, because I think everyone was really, really excited about the direction we were headed.
Seems to be one of those lost pieces of work there. It's a shame. I don't think we'll ever see a follow-up. I know it still gets talked about, but I think it's done.
I think they're still working on it. I think even David Farr may be back on it. I don't know. I don't know who wants it anymore. It was so like amazing for its the way it was financed, the way that it was shot, the way it was kind of hung together and released. Like, everyone was so hungry for a sequel, and they just dropped the ball. And like, maybe they'll do a sequel, but I think most people will be like, yeah, really?
Well, it was destination viewing for a few weeks. Like, everyone was talking about it, especially at least here in the UK. I can't speak to Canada, but it was really the thing. Even like my wife watched it, and she doesn't like spy stuff at all. So it was like,
sure.
Okay, maybe it was
sexy.
It was sexy. It was stylized. It was nice. It was something different.
Yeah, big time. Absolutely. Hey ho. No, it was good.
I had a question about one of your other credits, which is, I guess, continuing the Oscar Isaac connection. Just how you wound up.
Moon Knight.
Yeah, I think the best episode of the season. I think that's
Thank you.
Pretty unanimous. I don't even think there's that much of a argument in that regard with the episode Asylum. I would love to know, was it Oscar Isaac bringing you in for that, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I actually never asked if it was Oscar specifically. I've been talking to Marvel about Fantastic Four.
Oh wow!
And the same producer is produced Moon Knight, and they were actually about to go into production. They were sort of on the way towards production, and as is often the way with these massive budget things, for all kinds of reasons, what they need changes, and they had a draft of episode 5, but like it really didn't work, and they asked if I would come on board and kind of like do that, like sort of figure out the end of the series. I did a dialogue pass for Oscar on some of the British stuff, although he improvs quite a lot as well. And actually, I think some of the best lines in it are his improvisation. I'll take credit for a couple, but he was great. So I came on board and spent, I think, 3 or 4 weeks in Budapest with them, and then was sort of working from here. I mean, like that kind of work, the kind of production rewrite work, it's really fun to do, because you're kind of the ship is moving, and you've just got to help sort of steer it through the very narrow slalom. What was really fun about 5 is that it obviously had this amazing ambition, and just needed someone to be like, it's this, like this is how we do it. I also rewrote episode 6, but they then rewrote my rewrite. It was an interesting experience.
Were you familiar with the Moon Knight character going in?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, but I had always sort of written him off as a bit of a kind of Batman ripoff, and I hadn't read any of the sort of more recent stuff that really like does some pretty wacky, crazy shit with the DID and just the kind of psychology of Moon Knight. I would love if they ever do a second season, and there's a great run where Ra comes up against Moon Knight. There's like that would be really cool. I'd love to see Ra in the series.
I'd be down for that for sure.
Yeah. I have the thing under the sombrero back there is a Ushakti, which is not from Moon Knight, but my housemate bought it for me. My old housemate bought me as a gift. Yeah.
Well, I think before we go to our final question, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, because we spoke about this lightly off air and you teased it, so now I need to ask. What have you got going on at the moment? And as I hear, it might be spy related.
Yeah, I am. In fact, do you guys know this book, Shibumi? Have you come across this book?
I don't.
No.
Check it out. Trevenian is or Rodney Whittaker, who wrote under many pen names. He wrote a book called The Eiger Sanction, which Clint Eastwood made into an all right film. The book is a sort of piss take of sort of stories like that, and The Eiger Sanction, the movie, is quite sort of serious. So I'm writing the adaptation of Shibumi for the director Chad Stahelski, who made all the John Wick movies. So he wants to, I think, do this as his next movie. Shibumi is a spy thriller that is also a satire, not just of spy thrillers, but of the medium of popular fiction. And so I am trying to write something that is a spy thriller, as well as being a satire of spy thrillers and the medium of cinema. So it's interesting. It's different to anything I've written before. It's a particularly unique challenge because the book is very dated. About 400 of the 700 pages are basically the main character's backstory. It's very thin plot, like female characters and all bad, blah blah blah. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of cool. So anyway, I've just submitted the outline to those guys. So waiting for their feedback. And then I'm writing a movie, also spy related, called Dark Wire for Jason Bateman to direct, and Netflix. Previous one's Warner Bros. This is Netflix. Dark Wire is about the Australian Federal Police and FBI's fake phone company that they set up called Anom. They ran an anonymous phone company, essentially like a tech startup, when they realized that the world's criminals were communicating via these kind of customized phones. And they ran this operation and ended up getting tens of millions of messages, of incriminating messages against the world's criminals, and then staged this enormous raid across the world in June last year and arrested over 1,000 people in collaboration with like all of the world's kind of law enforcement agencies. It's a wild story. You should check it out. And obviously it's kind of it's great because they bring down loads of the world's criminals, but kind of also sort of entrapment. So there's an interesting kind of moral question at the heart of it. So I'm just outlining that at the moment.
Well, I can't wait to see both of those realized on the big screen and on Netflix. And I guess you've just booked yourself for your next visit on the show.
Yeah, I hope so. Let's see. I mean, if the gods of cinema are good to me, then hopefully I can be chatting to you guys again in a couple of years.
I'll try and meet you at one of the press screenings for him in London. We'll
Love
figure
that.
it out.
That'd be great.
Okay, Matthew, this is the crunch time now. We've spoken about Operation Finale. We've spoken about what you're up to. We need to see if you fit into that tuxedo. The question is, what is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Oh man, you told me you're going to ask me this question, and it stressed me out so fucking much today. I think that because it's just so hard to narrow it down, right? Like there are so many amazing spy movies, what is a spy movie? Like Parallax View would be very high up there. Does that count? Sort of, maybe. Day of the Jackal is like probably even higher than that. Day of the Jackal is like amazing. Not really a spy movie, it's sort of assassin police movie, but yeah. I mean, this is probably a bit of a cliched answer, but The Lives of Others is just, you know, maybe one of the best spy movies there is. It's so affecting and quiet and brilliant. I think that, you know, there's like the quiet spy movie, which you know, is amazing. If we're going for like slightly louder spy movie, I am controversially a massive fan of Bourne Ultimatum. I think it's the best of the lot.
Right.
If we're going for something like that, yeah, I think that's. So we're going like bang bang kind of movies. Bourne Ultimatum. If we're going for like slightly kind of quieter spy movies, Lives of Others be what I go for, I think.
I think that's the first mention we've ever had of Lives of Others on the show.
Oh, really?
We haven't tackled it yet, but I think it's the first of our guests that's actually brought it up as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's so good. You know the movie, right?
Another movie we haven't tackled it yet, but I'm aware of the movie.
Yeah, cool. Interesting. Check it out. See what you think. Yeah.
But Bourne Ultimatum, me and Cam go back and forth on that a lot. Between Supremacy and Ultimatum as to which is the superior of the Bournes. It's a tough fight, that one. It's a real slog.
It is a tough fight. I just think the sequences in Ultimatum are the most confident. The variety of the locations and the action is, I mean, that set piece in Waterloo is just so good. And it comes to a conclusion, that moment where he swims away at the end. Come on. I love it. I just think it's the most confident installment in the trilogy, and the one that kind of gives you a sense of like, both the others felt a bit like they were kind of leaving the door open for some more. And although the Bourne Ultimatum does do that, I just felt it was such a nice ending to the, you know, you sort of wish they hadn't brought it back, maybe a little bit. Although actually, the fifth Bourne movie's all right. People give it a hard time.
I give it a hard time.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, no, I spent so long, honestly, today thinking about this. Like, I was in one of my meetings today, just like completely losing track every time we were supposed to be talking about something else. I was like, but wait, which one is my favorite? I love those 70s ones, man. Like the 70s spy thrillers or the paranoid thrillers are just like, they're so good. But then also you've got like Tony Scott stuff, like Enemy of the State,
Spy Game,
amazing. Don't know if you can count Man on Fire, but Man on Fire, my God. I'm really stretching the definition of spy movie here, I think.
Don't worry, that's what we do professionally.
Yeah, sure, yeah, fair enough.
We voted both Parallax View and Day of the Jackal as one of the best spy movies of all time. So they're on our list
really?
too, to be fair. So we count them. They're on the list. It's fine.
Cool. All right, I'll take that. Amazing. Well, guys, this has been so good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been our honor, our pleasure to have you join us, Matthew. Thank you for the time. I think we could do this for another hour, but I'm sure you've got a lovely evening ahead of you. So I want you to get back to writing those spy films so we can talk about them some more.
Yeah, maybe that's one for early tomorrow morning, I think. But yeah, awesome. All right, guys. Well, so nice to meet you both. Scott, I'll see you at a press screening sometime. Cam, if you're over in the UK, we'll do it proper.
For sure.
Cool.
There you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Matthew Orton, taking us through the production and the screenwriting process for this week's film, Operation Finale. I mean, quite the in-depth conversation we had there.
Yeah, definitely. And this has been a movie, Operation Finale, that has kind of bounced in and out of our list of things to cover. I've tried to get this one across several times, but we had to change it because of scheduling. And I'm really happy that we finally found time to talk about it. The movie, I think, in terms of discussion points, was more interesting than I even realized it would be when I was, trying to get it onto our schedule. But also that we were able to talk to Matthew, who brought, an unbelievable amount of insight into the process of writing this material, translating some, I think, very difficult history to the screen, and making it a, compelling 2-hour spy adventure.
Yeah, it's funny because we've had a few screenwriters on the show, and we mentioned them, Matt Charman being one of them, who again came up with a concept and sort of passionately fought for it until it was made a major motion picture. And it's nice to know there's a connective tissue between the two of them, and it's nice to see the passion that Matthew had for this story, and to the point of putting it out there and it getting turned into the film. And I think he did a bang up job with it.
Yeah, and both very clearly interested in history in a big way in terms of writing new material. And that is an aspect to me that's always fascinating, because were I to become a screenwriter, like, that would not be my avenue. I don't have that sort of knowledge or comprehension in terms of like translating very complex history to the screen. And I was really impressed with how easily, Matthew was able to do that, and in a way where I never felt lost in the movie. I thought it did a really good job making it feel like an entertainment that people could sit and watch, but one that also had more, headier thought about it. Like, it was a movie that we definitely had a lot of discussion about that movie, just in terms of its themes, its, the historical elements that it was including and what they all meant. So I think he did just a fantastic job with that.
Well, I mean, firstly, no one wants to watch your Silences, Matt Helm, and Goldfoot /Fic film. That's never getting off the ground, Cam. You can stop pitching it now.
That's true. No one wants to see those movies that I am, I was going to say writing, but let's be honest, I've written them. They're in a drawer.
He's shooting them at home by himself.
The saddest of pandemic projects.
He is the bikini machine. But yeah, I suppose back to headier topics. It's interesting because another World War II film we spoke about a few months ago now, before the summer, Paul Verhoeven's Black Book, and that was a film me and you had an interesting time talking about, because it definitely challenged the viewer, but I think it challenged us in different ways that this film does. And this film really makes us grasp and think about a person and what would go into doing these acts. And we spoke about that, and I had trouble in the review of having to think about someone like Eichmann as a person. But on reflection and talking with Matthew and listening to interviews with Ben Kingsley, I do understand the approach. I just maybe hadn't expected it, and I hadn't expected myself to be challenged so much by what I perceived before going into it as a World War II spy film.
I think something that was really interesting that jumped around my head when I was talking to him about writing, in particular, Eichmann, as played by Ben Kingsley, it reminded me of a conversation we had with Ben Power about writing Hitler in Munich, The Edge of War. And it was kind of like two different approaches, where Ben Power talked about how with writing Hitler, you want to avoid the caricature, and you want to get across how, terrifying the guy could be in a room, but wasn't necessarily opening him up as like this, fully realized human character the audience could really try to understand. And that's the opposite of what was going on here, where Eichmann, in some ways, he's impenetrable through the entire movie, but at the same time, there was a very clear attempt to try to make us understand kind of where this evil comes from a human being, as opposed to more of this kind of fearsome Nazi figure that we would know him as through history. And so I thought that was a really interesting kind of contrast between those two writers and what they were trying to do with these very horrible people.
And it's funny, talking about the connective tissue with this film with Matt Charman, and having that angle on the film, and him and Matt Charman seeing the potential of the script and saying, hey, we got to get this out to Hollywood. And very quickly ends up in the hands of MGM, and very quickly ends up in the hands of Oscar Isaacs and the director as well. It just goes to show the strength of Matthew's writing. And obviously, there were revisions and there's things that he took out of the film, which we discussed in the interview. But I think at its core, it's definitely a challenging film, but I think it's delivered in a way that is approachable, and I think it doesn't push the viewer too far away. No,
I agree. And it also doesn't, though, on the flip side of that, it doesn't feel like it's sanded down for public consumption, if you will. Because that could easily be the case where they say, oh, just kind of, tone it down and we'll just sell it to a mainstream audience. Like, I think it actually asks tough questions of the audience, and I think there's some tough material, especially when you get towards the end and they're, showing actual Holocaust footage in the movie. That's something that, like, the average audience doesn't necessarily sign up to watch if they're picking a movie on a Friday night. But I think the movie's very smart in the way it tells a story, like Argo did as well, and Argo was referenced in the interview, of pulling you into, a very complicated, political event, making it feel like you are absorbing actual information and absorbing an actual element of history that's interesting and complex, but at the same time allows you to walk away feeling like you've, essentially been on an adventure with these characters and you have an emotional takeaway.
Yeah, and you look with the discussion we had originally, the script actually had perhaps a touch more comedy in it.
Yeah.
Or perhaps a little bit more farce in it. Like, it was pointing out some of the silly nature of all this in some aspects. And that obviously got sort of toned down through the process of creating the film and the revisions the film had. And these are the sort of things that I really enjoy about our chats with people who make the films, because you just don't know this. And this also isn't the stuff that's like on the bonus features of the DVD.
No.
This is really like how a film gets made and the reality of how a film gets made, because there are sacrifices, and Matthew did talk about one of the things he learned from this film is picking your battles, what hill do you want to die on. And I think they made the right call. I think this tonally works in a film. I think I'm not sure any more comedy would have done it for me.
Right. Yeah, like, to me, I think it works just perfectly as is. I didn't have the maybe the frustration with the Napoleon line that he had. It jumped out to us at least, so I guess it kind of worked. But no, I mean, it's a classic case, and we've talked to many writers at this point. Writing movies is hard because when you say write a story, just for yourself at home, that story can just exist in your mind as that's the story right there. When you're writing a film, there are, other people are involved. Chris White, obviously is an acclaimed writer himself, so he's going to have some input that he wants to give. Oscar Isaac as well, very, intelligent actor who I think understands story very well, given what the projects he picks. You look, typically Oscar Isaac has pretty good eyes for material. So right there, it's about collaboration, and you can see how certain elements are going to change over the course of the process. And I think the key is, are you ultimately happy with the end result? That's probably the most important thing, even though there's going to be, changes made along the way.
And it's interesting thinking about like the feedback. He said he got some quite abrupt and rude emails back from people who didn't like the characterization of Eichmann and giving him a personality. But that, if you read a little about what happened with the trial and like the whole banality of evil article that was put out, that was kind of the talking point around the guy, of just how normal he was, aside from this horrific side of his person and his history and his choices in life. And so I think giving him that sort of fully fleshed out existence was the right choice for the film.
I think it's the braver choice as well. Like,
Yeah.
I think to try to acknowledge the humanity of Eichmann was important to this story. And is it the choice that all writers would have made? No, I don't think they all would have, but I think that's what makes this movie, for me, like, that's one of the most compelling aspects of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, we will be talking about all spy films of all time, but that's probably the thing I'll take from this film, and I'll remember in our future discussions when we're talking about other bad people from other parts of history or this part of history that we discuss in our other spy films. I'll always remember, silly things in a sense, like the toilet scene. It was written to give him a sense of humanity, despite his actions, and I think, much as that is a choice that did rub some people the wrong way, it rubbed me the wrong way on sort of initial viewing, and we discussed it. I think it was the right choice.
Yeah, I agree.
But otherwise, just some other insights. I mean, fans of The Night Manager, you got a little bit of a what could have been with season 2. I mean, I know it's still somewhere in the production cycle. Some people are still talking about doing it, but I feel like that's the sort of magic has gone. It was lightning in a bottle for a small amount of time, and I think we've gone past that point.
Yeah, and I didn't acknowledge it when we were actually talking to Matthew, but like Night Manager was a crossover hit because you raised that question. You weren't sure if it was, but it definitely was a hit in North America as well. So I'm sure there would be an appetite for a season 2.
It's all just more an annoyance in my sense, because we live in a world where the Fast and Furious franchise gets like 12 films.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park gets 5 spin-offs. Jurassic Park's a great film, but it did not need 5 spin-offs. And yet, some really great television and some really great films never get the follow-up they should have had. And I think The Night Manager is one of those ones. Had they done a follow-up season in 2017, maybe 2018, I think it may have run longer, and we would still be talking about it more today.
Yeah, it feels like the time has kind of passed now, but yeah.
Same with you, basically.
Exactly. Yes. My time is so long past. Yes.
Yeah.
And it was interesting just talking to him briefly about Moon Knight, because I'm always interested about just working within kind of that Marvel machine. Easily, I was not blowing smoke at all. Episode 5 of Moon Knight is the best episode of the season. A very interesting, surreal, kind of emotional journey for the character, and I think it really works. And I was really intrigued just to hear him talking about how he was, at one point, talking about Fantastic Four, a property that has been done dirty 3 times on the big screen and 1 time not on the big screen, where there was the version that was, of course, in a vault that Roger Corman made back in the 90s. There is so much potential to that Fantastic Four that I can understand why still writers would be drawn to try to realize it, because there's magic there.
I'd be interested to chart the timeline of when that conversation took place with Fantastic Four, because obviously it's still only just got a director. Matt Shackman, I think, just signed on to do it after some behind-the-scenes nonsense, and it lost a director. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. John Watts was going to direct it, who had done the last few Spider-Man movies, and he dropped out to go do, I think, a Star Wars thing. And then Matt Shackman jumped over from Star Trek 4 to do Fantastic Four. It's all very convoluted.
A Star Wars thing, is that the next Star Wars story?
I don't know what it is. It's a TV show. That's all I know.
Something, a Star Wars thing.
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. It's just interesting to see the sort of talent that Marvel are looking to work with as well. You would think there are certain people they would go to, directors, screenwriters, and the like, actors perhaps, that would just sort of suit that fold. But, they're reaching out and working with Matthew Orton, who made quite a hard-to-watch character story about a man who performed atrocities in World War II. That doesn't have a direct line to Marvel, but obviously he knows how to write characters, and so they're tapping him up. And it actually, for me, it shows signs that the Marvel Cinematic Universe might have a future.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, Marvel is always looking to people who can write character. That's very important to them, but also people that are, have a high degree of professionalism. So that speaks well of him as well.
And Operation Finale is not without comedy. It has its moments. There's this bit where they're training in Krav Maga, and they mentioned why do I get chosen for these things? Oh, anti-Semitism, and getting it up, a massive roar from the cinema in terms of laughter. It has its moments. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for Mr. Matthew Orton.
Definitely.
Well, there you go, folks. That was our 2-episode deep dive on 2018's Operation Finale. We hope you've enjoyed it, and let us know if you have. Question for you, Cam. What are we doing next week?
Well, Scott, a bit of a change of pace. We are going back to reunite with Inspector Clouseau. We tackled him the first time on the Patreon, but this is the first time on the main feed that we are going to look at a Peter Sellers Pink Panther film, the spy-related Pink Panther Strikes Again, the only one that's really applicable for SpyHards coverage, but it's also like a case where something we'll do more going forward on the show, where we'll look at entries in franchises that brought in spy elements, a la Cars 2, for example.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll just tackle that one film that really is a spy movie and not bog ourselves down with the rest. We don't really want any repeats of Men in Black International.
No, we do not.
Nor does the world.
No, never again.
Never again. Well, there you go, folks. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to check out The Pink Panther Strikes Again from 1976. Finally, Peter Sellers is getting a spy film where hopefully he stays till the end credits.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. And join us next week. If you like what you heard on this interview, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us on our mission to become the most known spy podcast of all time, which may incidentally mean we become the worst spies of all time, but I will take that loss.
That's yours to bear.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, is it finale or finale?